Welcome to the first online seminar of this year, of 2017. And we have the pleasure to have with us very distinguished guests. And with no further ado, I would like to introduce to you our experts. And we have two today, Sarah Breslin. I hope I'm not pronouncing it wrong, in the wrong way. And we have Terry Lamb. Sorry? How do you pronounce it, Sarah?
Sarah.
Sarah Breslin?
Sarah's lovely too, so that's fine.
Okay, so Sarah is the Portuguese way. I'm Portuguese, by the way. So since October 2013, Sarah has been the executive director of the European Center for Modern Languages, an institution of the Council of Europe. She is a passionate linguist with a throughout understanding of both policy and practice in language education and general education. Sarah has worked in a range of sectors and locations since she graduated with first class honors in French and German from the University of Glasgow. After training to become a language teacher, Sarah worked for 15 years in Catalonia as a teacher and became first director of studies and then director of a prestigious language school in Tarragona. She then moved into higher education, where she was head of modern languages in Faculty of Tourism and teacher of English and German. On returning to the UK, she worked for 4 years in further education, teaching English for speakers of other languages and Spanish before coming head of international and European programs. Before taking up post as director at CSILT, Scotland's National Centre for Languages at University of Sarah worked for the Scottish Qualifications Authority, where her focus was on education policy, both at UK and European level, as well as cross-border qualification recognition. And our second guest is Terry Lamb. And Terry is a former secondary school language teacher. He is a professor of languages in interdisciplinary pedagogy and director of the Center for Teaching Innovation at the University of Westminster. He has published extensively in areas of learner autonomy, multilingualism, and language teacher development, and he's founder, editor of the Academy journal Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching. He has carried out consultancies and presented keynote papers in many countries and been involved in numerous research projects, including several at the European Centre for Modern Languages. Terry has worked closely with the UK and other governments, including as chair of the 14 to 19 Diploma Development Partnership for Languages and International Communication, which developed a cutting-edge curriculum for languages. He has been awarded the honor of Chevalier des Palmes Académiques. Terry is also former president of the Association for Language Learning and currently Secretary General and past president of Fédération Internationale des Professeurs des Langues Vivantes, an NGO of both UNESCO and the Council of Europe. And I'm really, really happy to have them here with us because they will give a very interesting contribution for the seminar today. The seminar today, in this specific context of e-twinning, we hope to give some tips and better equip teachers to understand the different contexts and challenges facing teachers across Europe, what it means to be for teachers to be in a cultural diversity context and linguistically, and how can teachers adapt their methodology to ensure that this linguistic and cultural capital becomes a rich resource for learning. So this seminar will provide an overview of the tools and activities developed and organized by the European Centre of Modern Languages of the Council of Europe in support of an inclusive, plurilingual, and intercultural approach to teaching and learning. And with no further ado, I would like to give the floor to our guest speakers, and I will now share their slides. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruta. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time at the end of a busy working day to join both Terry and myself for this webinar. I would first of all like to thank Anne Gilleran, whom I met last summer in Italy and who proposed this seminar, but also to thank Ruta for her patience and support in getting it all set up. And Ruta has already mentioned to you what we hope to achieve this evening, and it's really about challenging a perception that is still there, that the increase in linguistic and cultural diversity in our classrooms is an obstacle to be overcome, rather than looking on it as a rich resource for learning, and an opportunity for us as teachers to develop. So that's the idea, drawing on resources produced by the European Centre for Modern Languages of the Council of Europe. And the way we're going to do this seminar is I will do one part and then I'll hand over to Terry and we'll kind of go back and forth, but there will be opportunities at regular intervals for you to ask us questions, to make any comments that you would like to do, because we would really like to make it as interactive as possible. Even though we can't see you, we know you're out there. So I'm actually just going to begin by giving you, by setting the scene a little bit, and by telling you about the European Centre for Modern Languages, because I suspect that not all of you know the centre. And on this slide here, you can see who we are and what we do. We belong to the wider Council of Europe, which of course dates back to 1949 and has 47 member states. And of those 47 member states, 33 have agreed to put extra resource into language education. And I think that's a sign of the commitment and of the importance of the work we do in this field. The Council of Europe, as you probably know, has three main pillars: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And the work we do in language education really sits firmly within democracy. But in a sense, it's also about human rights and about respecting the right everyone has to use their own language. You can see from the slide that we operate on 4-year programmes, and these tend to be made up primarily of projects and training and consultancy. And I'll tell you a little bit about both as we go on. You can read our vision, it's there. And I hope it's a vision that perhaps by the end of tonight, you will also feel convinced that this is a worthwhile vision, and one that we should all be supporting through our work in education. The idea behind our projects is to bring together experts from across our member states to work on a particular topic. It might be early language learning, it might be CLIL, it might be adult language learning, and to come up with new tools and resources for teachers, for teacher educators, for inspectors, curriculum developers. But it's not just about 4 people working on a project. In the course of their project, they have to run workshops. And in the workshops, experts come from all our member states. And then the product has to be negotiated so that it's something that can work in very different contexts. And at the end of the projects, there are new resources. All of these resources are freely available on our website. And in the course of this evening, I'm going to give you an overview. I'm going to dip in and out of different resources and give you a taste, and hopefully tempt you to look a little bit more closely at what we have to offer. So the main part of our work then is on these projects, and then we have training and consultancy, where we take the projects into our member states and work on adapting them in different contexts. But before we look at that, I just wanted to show you the wide range of themes that we cover and that we have covered since the centre began over 20 years ago. We're not suggesting that these themes are separate. Of course, there's a lot of overlap across the themes, and for us, what links them in terms of our work is supporting teachers in their development. Is sitting there in the middle, bless you, Terry. That's what we feel links all of these topics, and we are very aware of the challenges facing language teachers today. and we hope that our resources and our activities are there to support teachers. And if we look a little bit at the current programme, you may remember in an earlier slide I talked about a 4-year programme. Well, we're in the 2nd year of our current programme, a programme that we have entitled Languages at the Heart of Learning. And the reason we've given it this title is really twofold. It's because we're convinced that there can't be any learning without language, any kind of learning at all. But we're also convinced that this is about hearts as well as minds, that language is really linked to identity. And it's very, very important to take that into account in everything we do in this area. So that's the title of our programme. And as you can see from the diagram, it's split into 2 strands: development, where we're looking for new solutions to current challenges. On the one hand, through projects, and down the side you can see the themes of the current projects that we're working on. A wide range of themes there. The importance of action research. How do we make sure what teachers do in the classroom feeds into research, and research feeds back into practice? And we think that that's a very important area that needs further development. Language learning environments. What do you do to make sure that languages flourish in a school? It's not all down to the teacher. There are many other factors, and we're trying to identify those factors so that they can be replicated in different contexts. Or language teacher competences. What does it mean to be a language teacher in today's complex world? There are many different competences that teachers need to develop. And here we're looking at what these competences are and how we can support their development. And I'll leave you to simply read the other topics. We then have think tanks, and think tanks are a way of bringing a wider group of experts together to discuss the 3 topics you can see on the screen, and then propose ways of working for the ECML. And we've recently had 2 think tanks, one on early language learning and one on whole school approaches to the language of schooling. And these are now going to lead into new projects. Excuse me. The second strand of our work is what we call mediation. And by that we mean promoting the work that we've already done and the resources we have. But more than promotion, it's about adapting them and making them suit the needs of different contexts. And we do this by sending experts into our member states through our training and consultancy, but also by organising conferences, colloquia, webinars like the one we have this evening, and through the European Day of Languages, for which the Council of Europe is responsible. And if you're looking for tools and ideas and games for EDL, then please have a look on our website. The next slide simply shows you the topics in which we're currently organising training and consultancy. And as I mentioned, this is where experts who've previously worked on a project, have developed a new resource, then work with experts in the member state and see how they can adapt these resources to meet local needs. And you'll see that there are 2 of these activities with an asterisk against them, and that's because these are co-financed by the European Commission. And we're really very grateful to the Commission for the support in these 2 areas. One of them, of course, being the title of tonight's webinar, Supporting Multilingual Classrooms. Terry Lamb is one of the experts involved in this training and consultancy. And so when he takes the floor, he's going to talk to you a little bit more about what happens in these workshops. So that was just a very brief overview of the themes in which we work and the training and consultancy that we offer. But I thought before we move into looking at exactly what we do in supporting multilingual classrooms, it was time to stop for a moment and think about what the philosophy is that underpins all of the work that we do. And this diagram is a diagram produced by our colleagues at the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. And of course, that's where, for example, the Common European Framework of Reference was developed, the European Language Portfolio was developed, and they came up with this scheme. And really what it's trying to say is that we need to think about language education in a holistic way. And we need to begin with the learner. And that's why the learner sits there at the top of that diagram as the key protagonist and the starting point. All of the rest is the work of the education system. And we know as teachers that sometimes it's the system that forces us to go in certain directions. And what we're saying is we really need to focus more on the need of the learner and adapt the system to suit their needs. But we're thinking of the learner as a plurilingual learner, as someone who comes with knowledge of different languages, perhaps of different dialects, and with different levels of knowledge in those languages, with partial competences perhaps. And all of these contribute to their learning. And we as teachers need to draw on all of that knowledge and all of those skills so that the development in one language can support the development in another. And that's what we're going to talk to you more about tonight and show you some resources to help you think about language education in this way. And of course, for us, the ideal is that it's plurilingual, that it's thinking about the learner and all of the languages they have. But also, even for a learner who perhaps has only one language, to recognise that they have the potential to develop competences in other languages. And just to quote to you from the Common European Framework, we talk about the plurilingual ideal, to develop a linguistic repertoire to which all knowledge and experience of language contributes, and in which languages interrelate and interact. And that's really at the heart of what we're doing. And of course, we're doing it, we're thinking about the learner in a holistic way, not just because it kind of feels like the morally right thing to do, but because, and Terry will go into this in more detail, research shows us that we learn most effectively if we're encouraged to use all of the languages at our disposal, and that the development of literacy in the language of schooling feeds into, but also depends on, a learner's literacy in their home language, and that everyone benefits and that children grow, their multilingualism grows best when all of their languages are valued and respected. So, having given you a very brief and a bit of a quick overview of the work of the ECML and the philosophy that underpins language education at the Council of Europe, I wondered if this was a good moment to pause for thought and just to ask you if you've got any questions or any comments or anything that you would like either myself or Terry to clarify for you. Thank you. Well, in that case, I'm going to hand over to Terry to look at the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks very much. That was a great introduction, and it saves me saying a lot of things that I might have said at the start. What I want to do is really to give you a quick tour of the issues that we would normally address and the resources that we would use in our two-day workshop. So Sarah's talked about the consultancy. We go to different countries and we do two-day workshops for a mixture of teachers, either language specialists who may be specialists of the language of schooling or of teaching foreign languages. They may be teachers of other subjects as well. So we do encourage that mix for reasons that I'll get back to at the end of the talk. Now, clearly those workshops are very interactive. There is a lot of work done in groups, developing ideas, sharing ideas, and adapting resources. So the resources that you see may well be used as a stimulus for people to develop other resources or to adapt them at least. The important thing when you're dealing with something as complex as this is to actually understand the purpose of the resource, what you want to achieve with it, and then to be able to adapt it slightly for your own context. So the areas that I'm going to talk through, and there will be places where Sarah will come back and illustrate some of the issues by showing you some other resources, other projects that I may not have mentioned. and also for questions and comments. But first of all, I want to uh, focus on what we would normally do quite early on in the workshop, encouraging people to reflect on their own plurilingualism in their own context and the multilingualism in their own classrooms and in the surrounding area, and then to look at some issues and challenge some myths around plurilingualism, which is what Sarah's already alluded to. After that, we would tend to also focus on the language of schooling, because one of the chief preoccupations of teachers in multilingual classrooms is how do we communicate with children whose first language isn't the language of schooling. So that is a very important issue that we do address. But we also make the point, as Sarah's just said, that by encouraging the children to draw on their existing plurilingualism, that is actually very supportive of their development of the language of schooling. That's quite a lot to get through already. If there's time at the end, then I'll show you another resource which looks at how we bring in the multilingual dimension across the curriculum in other subject areas as well. And I'll finish with a slide that talks about the language teacher and the key role that the language teacher plays in an educational context, not only within their own classrooms, but beyond, because as language teachers, we are more sensitive to language and the ways in which it's learned and used, and we can use that knowledge and those skills to support other teachers. So I hope that sounds useful for you, and this is a very early activity we would do with the workshop. If we could do it now, then you know, it would be wonderful to hear what you had to say. But as I said, this is 2 days of workshop condensed into an hour or so. So this would be one of the first activities then. We would ask the teachers present to imagine that the different languages or dialects that were part of their own plurilingual repertoire, where they might be located in different parts of the body. This sounds a bit bizarre, but I'll show you some examples in a minute. We ask them to do that, and then they have a body outline and they draw and colour in, and we ask them why. So they would label their bodies with this and then talk about it in small groups. And I'll show you some examples because I think the examples will make clear the purpose of this particular activity. So here we have, sorry, wrong button. Right, these are some resources that actually were produced for the Maldives project, which Sarah will say a little bit more about later. But basically it is about how we can enrich the classroom where the focus is the language of schooling. So for example, in England, the English classroom, or in the Czech Republic, the Czech classroom for everybody, how that can be enriched by the multilingualism that's present in the classroom. So these resources actually were tried out, first of all, in southern Germany, and that's where these children lived who completed these. Some of you will probably be able to understand the German, but I'll talk through anyway. This is Hannah. Hannah's identified 5 different languages: German, English, Italian, French, and Swabian, the dialect. And you'll see that she's coloured in the top of her head in purple, which is German. She doesn't comment on it, but clearly that's where she sees German as located in her body, which of course symbolises her identity, her person. The dark blue bit around her mouth is Italian, because she says that she likes to eat Italian food. So she is associating the Italian food that she's able to to name as already being some language and has very positive associations with that. You'll notice that her right leg at the bottom is also Italian, so somehow she must have a direct route between her mouth and her right leg. I never quite understood why the Italian food goes into her right leg, but never mind. The heart, the yellow, is French. She says, I love French. My heart's in it. I really love it. Also, that goes into her leg. English is around her waist and her lungs, I think she's saying, because she says it's an important language for communicating, for breathing air. So she sees that as, quite a useful language to have for communicating with other people. Sorry, I've just had something come on my screen, which I hope you can't see, but I can't seem to make it go. Distraction. She then says that the largest part of her, which is the green, is her dialect, Swabian. So that is very interesting in terms of the discussions around what is a language, what is a dialect. But you'll see these are all part of her repertoire. I'm going to show you one more because it brings in a slightly different dimension. This is Christina, who has Russian, German, English, Turkish, and French. German, I think, and speaking German is the top of her head, the yellow part. Usually I speak in German, thinking it. The reason for the usually is because the blue, which is put around her body, is Russian, and that is her mother tongue. And she said, I have an emotional connection to Russian. So that is clearly a very, very central part of Christina's identity. She has English as her hands and feet. She says that it's practical, you can always use it. So they're tools. English is a tool for her. She's got a kind of turquoisey colour on one of her wrists, which is French, which she says I learn in school, but I don't have much connection to it. And then finally, and what is really interesting about this one, is the other wrist is green, and that's Turkish. And what she's put is my friends and the area where I live. So what are the implications of these two drawings, these two children who I think are about 13, 14 years old, and the various languages that they in some way relate to? First of all, I would say that it shows that all of these languages that form part of their plurilingual repertoires are part of their identity. And I ask, if that is the case, and clearly a very important part of their identity, and particularly the mother tongue, what happens if those languages are not allowed in school? What impact might that have on the learner if parts of their identity are excluded from the very place where they're meant to be educated, i.e., developed from where they're at? So that's a very important implication. And the other thing that relates to Christina is lovely because I think she's seeing that the languages of her neighborhood and her friends somehow are part of her own identity. She shares an identity with them. And I think what this shows is that bringing in the languages of the community has huge implications for breaking down prejudices, barriers, for communicating openness and encouraging openness to difference. So I think these two slides actually usually have a very great impact on the teachers who've taken part in these workshops. I'm going to build on that because then we would normally move on to a question around the languages in their environment. What languages can be found in your environment outside school? And they would share that in groups. And what languages are visible or audible inside their school? And whatever their response, what does this reveal about your school and its values? Now we get a range of responses to this when they feed back. Um, some don't allow them to use the mother tongue in the school at all. And the arguments they give is that, well, they need to learn the language of schooling. And so they should just focus on that. And if they use another language, it'll stop them from learning the language of schooling. Somehow the languages are separate in their brains. Um, some teachers quite honestly say, well, I don't like them using it because I don't know what they're saying. Or I don't know if they're learning. I don't know if they're working. They might be chatting about the television or that they saw last night or something else. Some say, well, we fear that they'll get mixed up, that the languages will get mixed up in their brains and they won't know any language. So they need to forget one in order to learn another. Other teachers say, well, there are other languages in the school. They are the languages that we teach as foreign languages because they are actually very important. So we have the language of schooling, we have the languages that are taught because they are important. The implication is the other languages, including those home languages, are not important. And then we have some teachers who are encouraging the children to use them, to make the links between their language and the language of schooling, to compare languages, to share, to collaborate, and to make sense of lessons through their own individual linguistic capacities. In terms of values, I think these things say a lot in terms of inclusion or exclusion. I won't say any more about that, but you can imagine how powerful that is for groups of teachers to discuss those issues and to come to some realization about it. We then tend to move on to some learner profiles, and these are actually sort of real children. I'm just going to focus a little bit on Neslihan, not Yasmina, because of time. But these are actual children in Edinburgh, in Scotland, actually. They're given as cases so that teachers can reflect on how they might support them. But we also then later get the teachers to think about some of the learners in their own classrooms so that they can think about their own contexts. So it's a stimulus, like all of these materials, to reflection. I'll say a little bit about Neslihan. These profiles are also on the Maldives website, and they're presented as prezzies. So you've got something where it's from the children's own perspective. They're talking about themselves and the ways in which they use their different languages. Neslihan was born in Edinburgh, but she speaks Turkish at home. She went to kindergarten in Scotland, learned English. She speaks English fluently, but she has some difficulties with writing, like many children do. She also learned Spanish at school, but she says she's a bit worried about Spanish because she's already speaking Turkish and English, and she might get mixed up. She's exposed to Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, Lingala, Somalia in school, so she's also exposed to a whole range of languages. She drew her body in just two colours, in Turkish and in English. Although she does say that sometimes she speaks Turkish in school, but she whispers it when the teacher isn't there to her friend who also speaks Turkish and who is a better writer than she is and can help her sometimes. So that's Neslihan. We ask people to reflect about how they might help them, what kinds of activities they do. And of course, this sets the scene for exploring the ECML projects that we have. As you can see, the challenges that Neslihan faces is that her plurilingualism for her is seen as a problem, just as it is by many teachers. It's seen as a problem. And the work that we do in our workshops encourages teachers to see it not as a problem, but as a resource. And the work that goes on in the classroom can also help Neslihan to see her languages as a resource rather than as a problem. You can see that she separates the languages. She only uses Turkish at home. She only uses English in school. There are many reasons why this is a problem, which we don't have time to go into, but there are resources on this website which will help you if you're interested in following it up. She has everyday English, what we call BICS, the basic interpersonal communicative skills, but she struggles with academic English. Again, many monolingual children struggle in making the transition from everyday language to more academic language, this cognitive academic language proficiency of CALP. And clearly, she doesn't make connections between all of her languages, including Spanish, and therefore she sees it as an extra thing to learn. And what we would hope to do in the resources is help her to make the connections between these various languages. I think we're going to, that's just a sort of an introduction. That may take a couple of hours in a workshop for people to talk through all of these issues, if not longer. I think, Sarah, I'm going to pass to you to say a little bit about some of the projects that relate to this, starting with the Maldives project, and then I'll come back with the next section.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. Okay, Terry has mentioned a number of resources that sit within what was called the Maldives project, and this is an overview of what's available on the website of that project. So you can see what it's all about. It's about teaching the language of schooling in multilingual classes. And you can see that there are study modules, so things that you can undertake by yourself, things that you could use perhaps with your colleagues at a development workshop in your school, and looking at changing that mindset. And working with colleagues across languages and across subjects. There's also some lovely examples of good practice. It's always encouraging to see how someone else gets it to work for them. And there, all of these resources are freely available for you to download from the website. Now, just to say, you don't need to remember the name of a project. Because if I remind you of that diagram with the themes, you simply need to click on the theme. The website is organized by theme, so you would go in, for example, languages of schooling, or you would go in through plurilingualism, early language learning, etc. And there you will find all of the resources. And they're tagged so that if you go in one way, but it's actually sitting also on another page, you will find it there too. And so that's just to give you an overview of the project Maldives. And here's another one. This for us was a project from the previous programme, and in many ways it was quite an innovative project, because for the first time we were really putting the focus on the pre-primary sector. Why would we do that? There's not an awful lot of direct language learning that tends to go on in that sector, although of course there are some nursery schools that teach and try to introduce a language to very young children. But for us, it's not so much about that. It's about, this is the perfect opportunity to work with young children to get them to understand the notion of difference, to accept difference, to embrace different languages and cultures. And of course, the person who models that attitude is the pre-primary teacher or assistant. Is a portfolio for people working in this sector, where you can kind of self-assess your knowledge, attitudes and skills across a range of domains. This is just one of them. You can see what do you do to make sure that your own behaviour is appropriate? How do you create a favourable environment for children to learn? How do you work well with families of the children who come to the nursery school? There is a portfolio which you can download, and it exists in French, English and German. And it's great for initial teacher education in this sector, but it's also great to dip in and out of for workshops. But for us, we really believe that we need to start working on the mindset from the very earliest stage of education. And of course, I've mentioned parents in this context, but parents remain very important partners throughout a child's education. And we know as teachers that in many ways we've won half the battle if we have support from parents, if parents understand what it is we're trying to do, and if they show an interest in their children's education. Parents who perhaps do not themselves master the language of the country sometimes feel quite alienated from schools. They don't quite know how to approach the school. They don't necessarily feel part of the school community. And then on the other hand, you have parents who are native speakers who are perhaps worried about the number of children from other cultures and languages in school because they think this may hold back the learning of their own child. And all of these are obstacles which we need to help overcome. And this is a project looking at the role of parents, looking at different ways to bring parents into the classroom, to draw on their languages and cultures as a resource. And the website has a number of videos that you can watch. It also has a very simple leaflet for parents talking about the advantages of a plurilingual, inclusive approach. And it's a leaflet which we would suggest you could easily translate into your own language. And we at the ECML would happily format it for you and produce it as a leaflet the same as the ones that are there to download on the website if you were interested in providing us with the translation. So have a think about that because it's a nice and easy tool to use for parents. And I think there, Terry and I have talked for quite a bit. We wonder if you do have any questions or any comments. Please don't be shy to come forward to challenge us. We're here to answer.
I've been looking
You
at the
can raise
comments.
your hand.
Been looking
Yes,
at the
Terry.
comments. It's a very nice comments and sharing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that positive feedback. We will give you other opportunities if no one has anything burning to say right now. We realise, of course, this is a lot of information to absorb, which is why normally it's done in the context of a workshop where there's really time to work in groups and talk amongst yourselves and exchange. But we're just trying to make maximum use of the limited time and leave you with food for thought and resources that you might want to draw on. And I think, Terry,
We have one. We have one question. Yes. So Paula, go ahead.
I'm Paula Arduini. I'm a NetWinning ambassador, and I actually teaching in Italian state school abroad in Madrid. So it's a peculiar situation as the majority of children are born in Spain and their mother tongue is Spanish. I teach in a primary school in class in the first year. So children speak Spanish while playing, chatting, even working group. While they write in Italian, they interact among them in Spanish. Younger people speak Spanish with teachers too. Most of them are completely bilingual, so they can choose which they use. Our situation, the schools abroad, is opposite to schools with immigrant children. In our school, Italian is used mostly just for teaching, just for the language for teaching. The strange things for us, the children are motivated and parents are very supportive. They want the children speak Italian, and the children like to speak Italian, to learn Italian. So our situation is not to motivate children, but for example, teaching with two languages that are very similar, and so we have to all the time split the differences between Spanish and Italian. For me, this is a very stimulating teaching and learning environment. I like very much to teach here. the idea of a group of teachers in our school is to compare a situation and methodology with other schools abroad, because I think probably we don't know, but we should have a net of schools where the teaching language is not the language of the place where we live. So, for example, this German schools abroad or French schools abroad. Probably there is a kind of a methodology of material that we can exchange, or good practice that we can exchange, because in this particular situation, if there is some support from the net, from the your institution, I'd like to get to know something to help us and to help our children to achieve the language competences. Thank you.
That's a very interesting situation, Paula, and it's lovely to hear that you do draw on the two languages and help children use their knowledge from one to learn another. And I know, for example, for the German schools across the world, there is a network. I don't know how those networks then relate to the same sort of situation with other languages. But I would say that many of our resources would precisely fit your context. Terry's going to move on and describe some of these resources, but they're precisely about drawing on the parallels and the differences between languages. But certainly this is something that we can keep in mind, and I can certainly look in to see whether or not there is a network that goes across the languages for these situations where there are Italian schools abroad, French schools abroad, etc. They have their own networks, but I'm not sure they have a way of connecting. I think though, however, that the ECML is also very much a network, because we reach out to teachers across European countries. In fact, Terry, this might be the time to mention the LAX project and the associations, because that might be another resource for Paula.
Yes, yeah. In fact, I was just trying to think whether or not, for example, the French schools would be members of the Association for French Teachers in their country, because if they are, it's likely that they are also members of the International Federation of Associations of French Teachers, which is itself a member of my federation of language teacher associations, which is all languages. It's an international one. So I think there are those kinds of networks. It depends on how much the individual schools are connected to that. If they're government schools, I would imagine that they are connected. So the Italian schools, there is an international association of Italian teachers, and I'm sure they would be connected into that in some way. In fact, the current president of FIPLV is also the president of the International Federation of Italian Teachers. He's Italian and lives in Venice. So there are those international networks that enable people to collaborate. The LAX project was an ECML project which had the focus. We actually ran for 2 programs, so 8 years or so, which produced resources to enable teachers of different languages to collaborate with one another for all kinds of reasons. We're all facing the similar challenges, and we're also similar opportunities. So sharing rather than seeing other languages as a competition is very important. And on the ECML website, you'd find your way to the LAX project, which means Language Associations Collaborative Support. And on there you will find some tools, if you'd like to share them with people, that enable you to, first of all, find your way around the different ECML projects for different purposes, but also a directory that helps people to make contacts with other organizations. So collaboration is key. Should I move on now? Yeah? Okay. I'm aware of the time, and the next slides are actually a sort of a continuation of what I was saying earlier, because as you would imagine, the earlier work that I was presenting to you, describing to you, how we say, walking you through, because that's all we could do. We can't engage in deep collaborative discussion. But it's all about challenging preconceptions around the different value of different languages and whether languages should be represented in the school or not. And a lot of all of that is based on a number of myths. So we have resources. Again, I'm drawing on Maledive. I mean, it may seem as though that's the only project that I use, but I've just selected certain things for this because we have a very short time, and most of them seem to come from Maledive, but actually we draw on all of the resources that Sarah's been introducing you to. So the next one, we would ask people to consider myths about bilingualism. If you have the time, like the next minute or so, have a look through those and just think, would you put that is true, right, or wrong? Is it false? This resource is available, and there's also a document that accompanies it that explains why the particular statement is right or wrong. So bilingualism will delay language acquisition in children. That's a very, very common everyday belief. If people have not studied bilingualism, why should they not think anything different? Why should teachers, not think that it's a bad idea for children to use their home language when they need to learn the language of schooling? They're not doing it because they are anti other languages. They're doing it because they think it's the best way of supporting the children. And in fact, the research shows otherwise. So I'll just show you the next slide, which has the answers. You probably haven't had the time to look at that yet. But as you'll see, all of those statements are false. They're all wrong. And as I say, I mean, no time to go into that, but you go away and have a look at this website. I think it shows that there's a great need for us to find accessible ways of sharing research findings with teachers. It's one thing for sort of people that are not involved in education. We all have opinions about education, just like we all have opinions about medicine or something. But it's very important that we are able to question some of those assumptions and underlying beliefs. So as you can see, lots of myths. And the next slide, I keep pressing the wrong thing. The next slide shows you, it's actually part of a literature review I did for a publication I wrote, published in 2015, that pulls together all of the benefits for the plurilingual individual of being plurilingual: linguistic benefits, cognitive skills, health benefits. There's been a lot of research recently, particularly in Canada, about how being bilingual, plurilingual can delay dementia. That sent a lot of people out to learn other languages, I'll tell you. There's lots of news around about people enrolling for language courses. Social benefits, obviously employment opportunities, and the intercultural awareness, the kind of thing that I showed you with those profiles, with the child's outlines of the bodies. So lots and lots of benefits, and if you access that particular article, I can let you have access to it, and you'll see all the references there. But I want to move forward well, actually, there are some questions here for teachers. How do I find out about the benefits and myths about plurilingualism? How do I promote the language that I teach and still support all language learning? How do I help my learners to draw on their linguistic skills to learn other languages or other subjects, learn other subjects? And how can I help all of my students to enjoy multilingualism rather than being scared of it? Many children or many adults, if you hear someone speaking another language, it feels threatening because you don't know what's going on. We can educate children to be much more open and receptive and find that interesting, exciting, rather than something that we need to fear. Um, just the second point there, I'll just give you an example. When I was a head of languages in a school in the 1980s, I developed a system, a curriculum where there were 40 languages spoken in that school, 40 languages by children. The two main, what we call community languages, were Turkish and Greek. And I introduced a system where all the children had a taster of French, German, Greek, and Turkish. Motivation to learn foreign languages in England is not the highest because many people think everyone speaks English, so why should I bother? So this was partly about motivation, but a lot about valuing some of the languages that were present in the school. We use the other languages in different ways through language awareness courses. But what was very interesting was that when the children then could choose which language they would take forward, many chose to do French or, to do Greek or Turkish. Many monolingual English speakers chose to do Greek or Turkish. When we asked them why, they said, because we can practice it with our friends, we hear it around us. We don't go to France or Germany. Now, the French and German teachers weren't very pleased, of course, but the following year, when the children were allowed to choose a second foreign language, very rare in England that children do that, many of those children, most of those children who did Greek and Turkish, chose to do French or German as a second foreign language. Somehow, the Greek and Turkish had bridged the motivation for those children. They could see what the purpose of knowing a language was about in real life, and it gave them the motivation to learn French or German in that school. So we have to promote language learning generally rather than focusing on one particular language because it enhances motivation to learn any language. Okay, moving forward. This is a preoccupation of many teachers, quite rightly. You know, I've got children in my class and it's very hard. They don't understand what's going on because they don't speak the language of schooling at home, or they've just arrived. How do we help them? Now, I'm aware of the time, actually. I'm not sure. Do you think that is time for the video?
Yes, I can share the video now.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to show. It's only three or so minutes long. I'll have to tell you when to stop it, Ruta.
Okay,
But
that's okay.
this is a video that we showed that is available as well through ECMO website. It's an American one, but it's about a little boy called Moises. And I think it'll be obvious. You'll be able to see what it's about when you watch the film. The point is, I mean, whilst you're doing that, we show this because it's about a little boy who's from a Mexican family, a real child. I mean, there was research done to develop this film. He speaks Spanish, Mexican Spanish at home. He goes to the classroom and he has hardly any English at all. Because the family's only just recently arrived in the States. And we see the boy sitting there, and it's very clear that he really wants to learn. He tries all kinds of strategies, and the film illustrates it very well. I recommend you go and find it on the website. But he tries all kinds of strategies. He looks around at what other people are doing. He asks a friend in Spanish, actually, very quickly. It's actually about, there's numbers in there. He's looking at numbers. He's looking at the walls and the information on the walls. He's guessing what things might mean. He's very, very good at mathematics, and works out what the question is, but he can't answer because he can't say it. And by the time he's found in his dictionary the word 40, a friend has looked over his shoulder and given the answer. So it's all that kind of thing. What it shows is a very keen boy who then at the end goes to say to the teacher, he's written down, I need some help with the tests. And what we do is we show that, and you can see the slides there. What do people learn about Moises? How does this challenge your the preconceptions that can arise very often when you have a child there that is sort of seems passive because they're not able to join in, but there's all sorts of things going on, and certainly a motivation to join in. We ask them to look at what he does to participate in the lesson, and then we ask them to, in groups, think about how the teacher might be able to help Moises to learn. And what would you do in your classroom if this were to happen? And for some teachers, it's happening. So it's an opportunity to share their own strategies. How do you deal with this particular issue? So we then build on that by, again, in groups and brainstorming ideas about strategies that can help us to assess what students know and can do. If they can't express it in the language of schooling, very often those children are labelled as not being very intelligent. Whereas, as we could see from Moises, he just can't express it. So what can we do to help children to be able to engage? Many of our activities in schools involve the only way, really, of children demonstrating their knowledge is by writing lots and lots of text in the language of schooling. But what can we do? I mean, we can ask them. We can ask them to. There are all kinds of sort of strategies. They can fill in grids. They can match up questions and answers. They can label things. We can provide writing frames to scaffold the ways in which they can respond. We have to think carefully about the tasks that we set and the language we use to make sure it's very clear and not using very inaccessible language to help the children to demonstrate their knowledge. As teachers, we need to give them time to reflect before they respond. That they might be a little bit slower in thinking about the language. All kinds of things like that. And what happens is that the teachers usually get together, they come up with lots of ideas, and they realise that actually this is just effective, inclusive teaching. It's actually useful for all children. Sometimes, children who speak the language of schooling at home struggle because they don't understand the language that's being used to ask them questions, or because the key concepts have not been clarified very clearly, or because visuals haven't been used to bring it to life. So all of these things actually help everyone to perform better. It's not just about some special kind of techniques if you've got children in your class that can't use the language of schooling. Yes, they'll need some additional support probably, but we can still find ways of including them. We can put them in groups, we can put them in pairs, all kinds of activities like that. And you'll find more examples of that through the various projects, and particularly in that Maldives one. But the final question there is, how can we help them to reflect on their plurilingual competencies? And there are some projects which Sarah will show you in a minute that we use, one called language descriptors, for example, which talks about the kind of language you need in certain subjects to be able to perform in that subject. So it helps the teacher, but also the children to assess themselves. The European Language Portfolio helps them to reflect on their plurilingual competencies. And as I suggested earlier, support with the language of schooling can come also from a recognition that they can make connections between the different languages that are part of their repertoire. So here we have the FREPA project, which has been a very long-running project in ECML, one of the most popular projects that you may well have heard about it. It's CARAP in French. And this looks at how to raise language awareness. How do we help children to make connections between different languages? How do we help them to feel more confident when they come across language that they haven't seen before, rather than dismissing it and just thinking, oh, I don't know that, how they can develop strategies to work it out. And there are lots and lots, thousands of activities on this website, all for free. You can use them, you can adapt them if you need to. But this is, I argue, another way of supporting children with the language of schooling. So, for example, this is one of the activities. It's about Little Red Riding Hood. You'll know the story. It's Rotkäppchen, all of those. It's there in all languages, I think. And of course, the good thing about children's stories, fairy tales, is repetition. What big eyes you have, what big ears you have, grandmama, what big eyes you have, grandmama, what big teeth you have, grandmama. And of course, the grandmama replies, all the better to hear you with, or to see you with, or to, and then of course, eat Red Riding Hood, the final one. But looking at that in different languages, you can use that in different ways. And here's just some examples. So if you look at this is a lot of this is written in French, as you'll see. So up in the top left-hand side, you've got nom, which are nouns. All of that side is nouns. German, Allemand, Français, Italien. And you've got Finnish as well. They put the word ears, oreille, in French, and the children have to work out what must be the German or the Finnish or the Italian. And I'll just show you that one again. You can see that the pattern is there, and children are usually then very capable of working out that Ohren must be German for ears, etc. Yeah, so you can see how that might work, and they can do that collaboratively. They can look at how the word order compares. You can see there in French, you've got the question word in all of the languages, comes at the start in those languages, not in all languages. Turkish is different. You can see, though, that the position of the noun and the adjective is different. So this can get children to kind of think about the relationships between the languages, become more aware of grammar. And there are some excellent resources on the website that show you how to do that. This is another collaborative exercise. You'll see that there's a story here that's in a range of languages. And collaboratively, and we do this with teachers as well, you work out what the story is, drawing on whatever language knowledge you have of any languages. And to think about, as you're doing that, certainly with teachers we would ask them to do this, to reflect on what did they do to understand the story? What knowledge and skills did they use to understand the story? And what attitudes, motivation, interest. What, how did they feel when they were doing this? And, the story is here. But actually, most people can sort of pull that story together very well, sharing their linguistic knowledge. And the languages they've learned at school or from home or in any other way at all. And what this shows is that, first of all, to do that, it helps the children who have another language from home to sort of draw on that as part of your language resource to make sense of the language of schooling. It just needs a little bit of support. When I was teaching French or German, I used to do something to sensitize children to the different sounds in languages, because actually, interestingly, initially, if a word sounds a bit different, the children won't connect it. It's amazing how children who know the word radio wouldn't understand radio, or television even, télévision, they don't connect it. If you actually bring that out, make it explicit, get them to say, can you guess what this is? They become much, much more flexible in understanding. Oh, it sounds a bit like that, so perhaps that's what it is. So all of these activities help to support the children, to build their confidence, etc. I don't know if you've had the time to read that little story of a mouse, but it's a lovely story. These things can change attitudes. It gets children, first of all, sensitive that there are other languages, curious, motivated to find out more, to become open, to deal with the strange, and to build confidence. It builds also knowledge about the languages, because you talk about them. Where are they spoken? Who speaks them here? Generally about languages, and the idea that there are families of languages, some very close, some more distant. And the word equivalence is not quite so straightforward when you're wanting to translate. And clearly there are lots of skills developed there, which I won't go into. You can just see it helps them to analyze, to observe, to compare, to use knowledge of one language to understand another one. And I'll just finish this section with this quote. It's about overcoming a difficulty in the language of schooling. Pupils are invited to make a detour through other languages, which is a lovely way of putting it. And there's a reference there if you're interested in that. I am really aware of the time. We thought that we had lots of time, but anyway. There may not be time for pause for thought. We may want to move on. Sarah?
Terry, I wonder, since the next one is Marilla, and you were directly involved, if you would say a few words.
Yes, yeah, well, Marilla, I've talked a lot about Maledive, probably because I was also partly involved in that. Maledive was a development from the Marilla project, which was about what at that time we called the majority language classroom. So the Spanish classroom in Spain, the Italian classroom in Italy, etc. And how we could develop approaches which still, even in that curriculum, you could draw on the multilingualism that's in the classroom, and you could get children to do the kinds of activities that we did. Maledive moved that forward by looking a little bit more at teacher education and how we prepare teachers to deal with that. But you can see that there's a reference to a video there, which I would strongly recommend. It's in the south of France. It's a teacher with a classroom that has children who have a Russian background, an Arabic background, French, other languages. But it's a teacher who uses that language to actually get children to think about how they make things negative, how they ask questions. And he doesn't know those languages. So he's really drawing on the children's knowledge, getting them to come up and say, how do you do this in Russian? And the boy will explain how it's different. So it's a great resource, and that's exactly what it is. So it's to help all of the children to understand French grammar better, because it's a French lesson in France. But you understand it better if you've got some other perspectives on it.
Thank you, Terry. I'm just going to very quickly now mention a few other resources which you may find useful. The first one is a project called Community. And really, you can see there from the title, it's about how do you bring in all of the players in the education community. So the parents, how do you work with the local library? How do you work with the psychologist in the school if there is one? How do you make everyone aware of the resource that's there in these community languages and support these learners to develop their own literacy and their knowledge, of course, of the language of schooling? What's really nice about this project is that it's linked to a Moodle platform, and there are little modules covering the topics there on the screen, and you learn about them. So there's a little bit of background research. You try out an activity, and then you can explore further. And again, it's something that you can dip in and out of. You can focus on one particular aspect. It's something you can do on your own. It's something you can do with your colleagues. So one I would recommend to you, and it's in English and in French. Terry mentioned this one earlier. This is really now thinking about how you might support your colleagues who are teachers of mathematics or teachers of history. Because obviously when they went through their training, there probably was very little on language awareness. And they probably had the expectation that the children sitting in front of them would master the language of schooling, that it wasn't about language at all. But of course, the situation has changed. But as Terry said as earlier, it's also supporting all children who may be struggling with academic language. So here this project has looked at what is the level in language that's required at different stages. So children 12 and 13, and perhaps just starting their secondary education, children 15, 16, just finishing their compulsory education. What is the level needed to make those subjects, mathematics and history, accessible? And the suggestions there on the screen are ways in which these descriptors that have been developed based on the Common European Framework of Reference can be used in the classroom. So another one for you to think about. And of course, there are many, many resources that have been produced over the years by our colleagues in Strasbourg. And here on the screen, I've just listed a few, the most recent ones. Some of them have been completely updated. Some of them are brand new. The one that I would really recommend to you, particularly if time is short, is the first one, the language dimension in all subjects, but there is a short version. And there's a nice sort of executive summary with some really practical tips for using this in school. Something that would be really good to ask people to read before a workshop, for example, a development workshop in your school, and for everyone to talk about what they've discovered through this booklet. Again, these are all freely available to download on the website. They're on our website and they're on the Council of Europe's website from Strasbourg. I'm going to go very quickly because I'm not. This is another project which really goes beyond traditional CLIL. And the idea was that sometimes CLIL has ended up where both the language and the content have been treated a little superficially. Of course, that's not always the case, but that can sometimes happen. So how do you move beyond that and ensure deep learning, really develop the cognitive skills in your learners? And you can see there the different areas that are covered. They talk about pluriliteracies. So how do you go from reading to writing, from listening to speaking and vice versa? How do you really develop these skills in depth. And the resources here can be used for the foreign language classroom, for the mother tongue classroom, in any context. And there's some really nice little videos you can go on and discover, as well as some material, CLIL material in different subjects that you can download and use for free. Another project is the Core project, which looked at developing a whole school approach to language education. And this, of course, we know is important because we, as language teachers, we can't do it all on our own. We need everybody to be on board in the school, our colleagues in different subjects and different languages, senior management, parents, etc. And here you've got case studies from different countries where schools have worked to try and bring in a whole school approach. They're not complicated case studies. There's a number of really simple ideas that you could adapt to your own context. And Terry, I think it's back to you.
Okay, all right. Well, if you remember at the start, I said if there was time, I would say something about multilingualism across the curriculum. I must apologize for the coughing. The good news is that you can't catch the cold because we're doing a webinar. So I don't think the germs have learned how to cross the ether yet. I'll just show you one thing in relation to this. There's another project which is called Combat Plus. Combat Plus means content-based teaching plus plurilingual cultural awareness. Yeah, and basically this is about how in other subjects of the curriculum you can still bring in some activities that get children to think about perhaps some of the technical terms and what that might be in their own language, home language, so that they can continue to develop their home language. This is another very important aspect that we haven't had time to go into today, but we need to support children to continue the development in their first language as well, rather than let it, kind of just stop. And there are lots and lots of examples, if you look at this website, of in different languages, of materials for geography, physics, for all different age groups, music, art, cooking, everything. So I'll give you a one-page example. This is a geography module in there. And they're asking the children there simply to put a circle around any words that they can see that they think describe the relief, the landscape, kind of landscape terms. And, to do that together. And usually children will come up with ideas around that. It's the same kind of thing. In English, it's a plane. So una plana suddenly becomes clear. Una pianura becomes a bit clear. And when you work out, the German, even if you don't know it, look at the position, eine Ebene. But then you've got words for hills and mountains, volcanoes, all sorts of things. So it's just an example of how whatever you're teaching, there are some, you can bring even small opportunities for children to think about the different languages as well. And usually children really like that. So coming to a close, the earlier questions that when I showed you Neslihan, certainly, and her profile, how do I help Neslihan to turn her linguistic repertoire from a negative into a positive? What might we do as teachers to help her to perceive herself differently? What kinds of activities? I hope you can see that the kinds of things that we've just given you a very, very quick glimpse of will help to address some of these challenges that were identified in what Neslihan had to say about, keeping languages separate, developing academic English in her case, because she was in Scotland, not making connections between language. You've seen some examples of how we can do that. and how we might actually transform the challenges into resources through valorising her plurilingualism by including that plurilingual dimension in the classroom, by providing activities that are very active learning type activities to transfer learning across languages. The children are the experts because they bring the languages. The teacher doesn't need to know all of those languages. And, you know, identifying some common errors from the Turkish to the English that might impact on her writing. There are activities that kind of help teachers to develop those sorts of things as well. So clear benefits for Nestle Han, but also I hope that, oh, sorry, not showing you, Yasmina, didn't have time. Also benefits for all children and how all children can benefit from linguistic diversity. There's so much to learn, so much not only linguistic but also cultural when you find out about the different languages and where they're from, but also those attitudinal developments that happen. And the last slide from me is just to say that those of you who are language teachers, that you play a key part in all of this, these changes in school. You may, some of these ideas may be new to you, but you have the raw materials there to help you to support other teachers. You have the knowledge of language, not just languages. You have the awareness of language, and you have experiences of supporting children to learn other languages. These are all areas that you can support teachers through mentoring, through professional development, with problems that they might have with assessment, and of course bringing in parental involvement in the ways, using projects like the one that Sarah showed you earlier. Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you for the last word, but thank you everyone for listening.
I'm just going to try and sum up everything that we've been talking about this evening, and perhaps ask you to think back to that diagram where you saw how the learner was the central protagonist and all of the languages interrelated, and really to think about what plurilingual education promotes. And I'm not going to read that out to you, but I think we've tried to show you through our examples that this is something very positive. It's positive for the learner. It's also positive for the teacher, because you will also see how your children are responding, and that of course brings so much satisfaction. So these are some of the things that we believe plurilingualism promotes. But probably most importantly, it's that respect. It's that respect for the cultures that are embodied in languages, for the identities that are embodied through these languages. And it's something, if we think about the state of the world of the moment, we think about the rise in xenophobia, we think about the growth in populism. It's really time to reassert the importance of these positive attitudes towards different languages and cultures. And I would just like to finish by saying I hope that you found the webinar useful, that perhaps you will take a look at the resources that the ECML offers, and that maybe together then we can all act as agents of change, and we can really challenge those myths and work together to create a more humane, inclusive, socially cohesive society, the kind of one that we would want for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Terry. I think I would just like to ask one of the questions that were in the chat. Just to finalize, is that I think it was Daniela actually, asking how they can be involved in this project if it is possible.
Yes, thank you for that question, Ruth. It's a very good one. If you look on our homepage, you will see a calendar of activities, and you will see where it's a workshop or a network meeting, and how to contact the national authority in your country to see if you can take part in these events. Workshops and network meetings, one representative comes from each of the member states of the ECML, and there is a national nominating authority in that member state. The details are there on the website, that anyone interested can contact and so that they can be considered to take part. But of course, other people can come as well if they're able to fund their trip to Graz. We also then have the training and consultancy, which is going into the member states. And again, you need to contact your national representative to find out about that and how you might be able to take part. But then there are the open events. So for example, just before Christmas, we had a colloquium on testing and assessment. It was open to anyone. You just needed to come to Graz to fund your trip. And there will be another such event at the end of this year, looking precisely at plurilingualism and how we need to rethink language teacher education through the plurilingual lens. And that will soon be advertised on our website, and everyone is welcome. And we usually live stream the events as well. So if you can't physically come, you can join in online. In terms of the resources, of course, they are free for anyone to download, to use, to adapt. But also you could sign up for our e-newsletter, the European Languages Gazette, and that way you would automatically get the alerts for future events, workshops, etc. And if anyone has any other questions about how to get involved, please just send me an email. The email addresses are on the website, and we'll be more than happy to respond.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think it was a very, very nice webinar, very, very interesting. We had a lot of very positive feedback in the chat. So first of all, I would like to thank your availability, Sarah and Terry, for being here with us today, for presenting so many resources, useful information. The majority of the comments were that you gave a lot of food for thought. So I think they are now going to go through again this presentation and listen again this recording, and probably they will come back with more questions. So thank you for being here with us. I hope you enjoyed being with the Twinning Teachers.
It was lovely. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for the 70-something teachers that were here this evening. I would like just to announce the next online seminar. It's next week, and it's going to be collaborative learning from theory to practice. So I wish you a lovely evening and hope to see you here next week. And thank you once more.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.